Jobs are plentiful, business is booming, but it's also harder for a lot of Canadians to pay their bills. We will take real and tangible steps to get inflation under control and to make life more affordable for Canadians.
That's Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland outlining the government's efforts to deal with the impact of inflation. This is Canadians pay more for everyday essentials from gas to grocery store items. So is the government's response here to help Canadians weather this inflation storm enough? It's Thursday and at issue is here. Chantal Hebert, Andrew Coyne and Althia Raj. Elamin is off today. Good to see you all. So there wasn't anything new per se in the Finance Minister's speech, but I think an attempt to sort of outline the things that the government has been trying to do in terms of a response. What did you make of it, Chantal?
That the government is feeling that it's leaving an empty frame. So this was mostly a placeholder. I'm not sure it's going to work, but it tells you that the government is under increasing pressure, and that will not stop. It will only get worse once the Conservatives have a real leader to have something to show. And just as an aside, that wasn't a plan. It was just a restating of the budget.
Yeah, but maybe needed, Andrew, because the budget was a couple of months ago. Maybe people at the time didn't know some of the things the government was doing and that they were, in fact, supposed to be a response to inflation. I don't know. Your thoughts?
I think there was a little bit of a shift in emphasis. So yeah, I was restating a lot of things in the past, but with maybe a slight change in emphasis. I think you distinguish between measures that are designed to compensate for inflation, which are these, indexing of benefits, et cetera, and measures designed to actually fight inflation. Now, most of the heavy lifting of that is going to be done by the bank, but there are things the government can do, and the minister alluded to this in part, that it can help support that. One, by backing the bank to the hilt in terms of its resolve to get inflation down, making sure that there's no daylight between the bank and the government on that. Secondly, by getting control of its deficits and debt so that people don't worry that the bank is going to be concerned that if it pushes the economy into recession, that the federal deficit and debt are going to blow up. And thirdly, by supply side reforms that make the economy more nimble and adaptive and efficient so that a given amount of money creation translates into growth in output rather than growth in prices. And on all three fronts, you could say the government has begun at least to talk about it. I think you give them part marks at best in terms of their actual delivery on it. They muddied the waters needlessly in last fall by inserting a lot of extraneous language into the bank's mandate that wasn't to do with its core anti-inflation mandate. They're not really begun really to come to grips with the deficit and debt. And they've only just started to talk about a more productive economy. And that's the biggest single challenge for them. Until now, they weren't even talking about it, as Bill Morneau, the former finance minister, ruefully confessed in a speech recently. But now at least they're talking about it, but we still don't see a really coherent or serious plan for that.
Althia, and then I see Chantal's got more to say. Althia, yeah.
It was a repackaging. So yes, it's all stuff that was already announced in the last budget and in the budget, frankly, before that. But I think to everybody's point, now they've discovered that all these measures actually can be better sold as inflationary measures. And so in that way, I think it was smart for her to address something that is top of mind for most people. I did find, though, rather surprising that I feel like she still lacks empathy with the everyday Canadians who are going through this. She talked about the kind of Canadians who are going to the gas station and wincing at the price of gas. Well, those kinds of Canadians are basically everybody. I'm sure even if you're a household that's making $100,000, you're still a little bit sticker shocked at the price of gas. And the fact that, our credit rating is AAA and that the banks are strong and secure is not going to help people pay for their mortgages when interest rates hike. So I still think that there's a lot of work for the government to do on that front.
Chantal?
If that's how the government is hoping to counter messages coming from the NDP or the Conservatives or the Bloc Québécois, good luck to them. I still feel that this is more partisan than policy-driven response, as Andrew points out, to Bill Morneau's criticism on productivity, and you saw the compulsory line about how we're actually aware of this and we're dealing with this, and a response to Pierre Poilievre on the Bank of Canada. fair game, but as Althia points out, that is not talking to Canadians in any way, shape, or form. That is if there's a message from this, listening to it from the outside, get your head out of that bubble quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, now to be fair, Freeland did point to things, that people, I think, tried to present some empathy to Canadians. Whether she got there, I mean, I don't know. But Andrew, how damaging is that politically if the finance minister, deputy PM, can't sort of reach people? Because that is important too, to just be able to feel like, you're being heard as a Canadian right now.
Yeah, and that's important, but they've got kind of two messages, and to some extent they conflict that they have to get out. One of them is we're here, we care, we're listening, we feel your pain. Absolutely. But the other one is we're going to get inflation down come hell or high water. Inflation will come down one way or another. The bank will be able to get it down. The only question is, do we go through a recession or not to get there? And that's going to depend upon how much people actually believe that the bank and the government are deadly serious about getting it down as quickly as they possibly can. So, that requires actually a kind of a hard message rather than a soft message. And to some extent, those two messages are going to be in conflict with one another.
Yeah, because it's going to be, if that's the goal, to move beyond this inflationary crisis of some kind, it's going to be difficult for everyone, I think, Althia.
Yeah, and to be fair to Ms. Freeland, I think she was quite honest, especially in the press conference that followed the speech, in which she said, it's gonna be a difficult time, and she doesn't have any answers, and she's gonna be honest about that. And to the other point, to not follow the example of some of the provinces like Quebec, for example, that has sent everybody who makes less than $100,000 $500. She said, she's taking a responsible approach, and measures like that would lead to increased inflation. So yeah, I agree with Andrew. She is trying to walk a pretty tight rope. But I still think in the tone and the messaging, like one thing the government has not been successful, not been very good at doing, is communicating what its messages are. So in some ways, to your point, Rosie, it is good that they're repeating the measures that they're taking on old age security, for example, childcare, efforts that are going to try to make life more affordable for some people. And, $500, if you don't make a lot of money, is still something that goes a little bit. Like I'm thinking of the rent help for low-income Canadians. Yeah. But I do think that it's at least, there is a very dark message there, and she did not gloss over that.
Chantal?
If you think that's going to be tough on the Liberals, think of the NDP and that 3-year deal. Because the pressure is going to be on them to say this government is not doing enough. And I don't think that speech addresses that in the sense of the connecting with people and people's concerns. And the venue wasn't picked for that, obviously.
Yeah. Last word to you, Andrew.
Just to elaborate on my previous point, the paradox is the more people believe that we're going to go into a recession to get inflation down, the less likely we are to go through a recession. Because if they do believe that, they'll adjust their wage and price demands very quickly back down to 2%. If they don't believe it, if they think it's all a big bluff and that when push comes to shove, the bank won't have the nerve to do it, or that the government won't, then they'll keep on demanding 6 or 8% price and wage increases. So it's a kind of a deterrence game. It's a credibility game. And that's where, as I say, the finance minister's role has got to be to back the bank to the hilt on that.
Chantal,
I don't think the average Canadian, as he or she is putting gas in the car or buying groceries, is wondering about the concept of a recession at this point.
They may well be shortly.
On June 20th, our government will suspend the requirement to be vaccinated in order to board a plane or train in Canada.
The adjustments we're making today are based on science, and they will not have an impact immediately on these airport delays.
That was the federal government announcing the pause of vaccine mandate rules for domestic travel and federal employees. That'll take effect this coming Monday. It's something the opposition has been calling for. At Issue is back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. Althia, I promised I'd start with you. So the ministers that day defended their decision today, saying they took their time to get the decision right, looked at the science. I certainly know that they were considering it over a period of many months, got close to things, had to pull back. But what did you make of the timing and I guess the response?
I think he was getting to a point where there were a lot of cabinet ministers who were getting very antsy, but because some of their colleagues, notably, frankly, the prime minister, did not want to relax the rules. So you were right. Cabinet has been looking at this for months. They've wanted to take a prudent approach. I mean, I can see that from Jean-Yves Duclos, the health minister. They really wanted to make sure the science was solid on transmissibility. They are also very worried about the fall, about things picking up in the fall, and they didn't want to send conflicting messages. I think they still probably need to do more to encourage people to get those third and fourth dose of the vaccine. I don't know that message really got through this week, but it was politically becoming untenable for them to continue with this approach that did not seem, frankly, to be scientific based. And I have a conservative MP who messaged me and said, one of the thing that would really help them counteract all these conspiracy theory messages that they're getting in their emails is to point to the fact that the government is actually acting on science. And it didn't seem like the government was, and now it is.
Chantal?
It's amazing what science does over the course of less than 2 weeks when the government refused the Conservative motion that basically suggested much of what was announced this week. And I think on this, the government runs a risk of losing its moral authority if we should come to a seventh wave next fall. And it needs to provide a rationale for whatever restrictions it is putting forward. All of this as a result of just sitting around, not looking at reality and not presenting Canadians, frankly, over the past 3 months with any arguments for not doing anything to decrease restrictions. And then if your neck is hurting from the sharp turn, suddenly saying on June 20th, the science tells us it's all going to be good.
Andrew?
If I can borrow a line, this seems less driven by medical science than political science. If it was about the science, it's true that with the Omicron variant, the effectiveness of a 2-dose regime dropped from about 80% effectiveness in preventing transmission or infection down to about 20%. But with 3 doses, it jumps back up above 60%. So if they were really serious about the science, they would say, well, we're going to convert a 2-dose mandate into a 3-dose mandate. The problem is only about, I think it's 50% of the public has got their third or fourth dose, whereas it was 90% with 2 doses. And with infection rates currently being rather low, I think there's a certain complacency that's set in. And meantime, the Liberal backbench is panicking over this because they can see, particularly as it emerged as being blaming the airport chaos at Pearson on vaccine mandates, which I think had frankly little to do with it. But the effectiveness of that message meant that it became not just a question for the small minority who aren't vaccinated, but for the public at large. I think that spooked a lot of Liberal MPs, and I think that's frankly what ultimately drove this.
Okay, we'll leave it. Yeah. So
can I just say, who would have thought that Andrew Coyne would be quoting Pierre Poilievre?
Oh, I didn't even realize where that quote was from. So there you go. Okay, thank you, everyone. Good to see you all here.